Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is John Snow. I'm a senior virtualization engineer at Red Hat, and recently I have been working an awful lot on our API documentation. So let's go ahead. Just in case anybody is not quite sure, I'm about to say these words an awful lot. So QAPI or QAPI is both our schema format, like in the tree, and our code generator for operating on those things and generating lots and lots and lots of stuff. QMP is our machine protocol. That's the actual API format that we have. So there is a small difference between QAPI and QMP, and if I use those terms interchangeably, forgive me, they're really close. QAPI doc, similarly, is the name of our source code format and the doc generator of the same name, and Sphinx is, of course, our documentation generation framework. So today, I would like to talk about the problems I have with our docs, what I am doing to fix those problems. I would like to cover some of the new syntax for how to best leverage this new documentation, and I want to talk about some of the problems and things we have yet to solve. If you zone out for the next 25 minutes, there's just a couple of things that I really want you to take away from this. The source format isn't changing a whole lot, but it is changing a little, and if you are maintaining lots of things, it may be useful to know exactly how I'm, moving your chair around on you. Some new features that I want doc writers to consider using. I want to explain how to debug when the new generator breaks to lessen people's frustration with the changeover. And at the end, there's some things that I kind of want people's input on because I've been alone in a room for 4 months trying to figure out what the best way to do this is. So we'll start with the problems that we're having. I just want to be clear that I'm about to mention a bunch of problems I have with the docs, but that's not meant to disparage people who have worked on the existing docs. They did the job that they had to at the time. I'm just obsessed and I wanted to do it better. So thank you for everybody who's worked on what we have. But if I make fun of Marcus, he'll forgive me. So for problems I have with our existing docs, number one, we don't have an index exactly. We have a table of contents, but it's organized by module and it's organized by however we have it laid out in source. So it's kind of difficult to get a list of commands. It's hard to know at a glance, hey, what are the commands that we have in this version? What are the events that we have? What do I, as an external developer, need to know about this version of QEMU? And it's kind of hard to figure that out at a glance. Yes, we have API commands to list these things, but, well, you'd have to know about that API command, so chicken and egg type of problem there. There's no cross-references in our existing doc, so everywhere we have littered, oh, see this command, see that command. Well, I'd love to. Would you help me find it in this giant, multi-megabyte HTML file? No. Use Control F, maybe. I don't know. Help yourself. So this has long been a frustration for me. So that's another thing I would like to fix pretty desperately. The documentation itself is incomplete. We often have commands or other structures that just say, yes, the members of this other thing are what comprise this. When we start layering things kind of deeply where we have shared structures between things, you're going to have to hop back and forth quite a lot to figure out, oh, well, what actually goes into this object I need to send on to the API. So that can be a little frustrating sometimes when you're trying to figure something out quickly or share information with someone else where you can't give them a single page to look at. They have to hop around. We have missing returns information for some of our commands. If we just didn't document it in the QAPI source, it doesn't show up in the HTML either. So this command returns something. What is it? I don't know. Good luck. The URLs that we have for the documentation are not stable. You can see there the little anchor tag is QAPI doc 390. That changes depending. It's just based on how many things you had in the docs that day when you built. So how long do you think the little URLs in the corner are actually going to be valid for this presentation? They might be wrong by the time you download the slides. I don't know. So it's hard to share information from our docs in a reliable way. This is subjective. I think the visual contrast is kind of poor. It's hard to tell where certain sections start and end because of, you know, the members header maybe looks a little less interesting than the fields, which have that kind of horizontal rule background applied. And when you have hundreds of screenfuls of this, it's hard to kind of scroll through and at a glance kind of discern what you're looking at and why. This is a little more arcane, but our QAPI or QMP introspection, I should say, see, I said I would mix those two terms up. We don't reveal type names in our API. We reveal event names and command names, field names, but the names of the types of those fields we don't reveal. But our existing docs use our source factoring, so we reveal all kinds of type names and things that are actually not API. We don't promise that these won't change. So a problem with the existing docs is we might lean a little too heavily on pretending like these are real things. They're real to us, the developers, but to users, they're fake, unreliable, and we shouldn't believe them. So this is my overall argument for why docs needed a revamp, which is that it's hard to get a feel for things by looking at our docs. If you have already been developing for QEMU, I think it's easier to figure it out because you already know a lot of the pieces of the puzzle. But if you're a newcomer here, I think it's difficult between the lack of cross-references, incomplete references, everything's fragmented between multiple different sections. It's really hard to actually learn anything for the first time using this as your primary source. So I'll talk about some developer problems I have. Our existing doc generator builds docutils nodes directly from the source. It uses a mixture of Sphinx directives and manual docutils node construction to sort of build our docs, but it exposes a lot of like really subtle bugs where Sphinx was not prepared for us to do that, because Sphinx has its own ideas about how it will modify the docutils node graph, and that causes lots of havoc. And the Sphinx APIs themselves are all based around expanding restructured text directives. So we bypass that completely to the, our own detriment of being unable to use the large majority of the Sphinx internal APIs. So it's pretty hard to fix or extend anything that we already have, because we decided to, blaze our own trail a little bit, and that makes it pretty tough to add new features right now. The syntax right now is confusing because of our decision to build our own trees. It's not clear when you can use restructured text where in the QAPI source documentation. We say you can use most, and that's kind of true from experience, but it's not well documented. It's not actually well understood. Certain constructs currently break our doc generator in weird ways that take an extremely long time to diagnose. And the errors that you get are not great. So here I've introduced intentionally an error down on line 17, and helpfully our make system tells you that the error is on line 9. So if you have long series of docs and you don't know REST that well, these errors may help you to lose all of the rest of your hair. So for my biased opinions here, each irritant, I think, on its own introduces a friction to people who are less familiar with QEMU, and it contributes to a negative perception in general. So whatever preconceived notions people already had, this makes it worse. And it doesn't matter if it's actually true or not, but first impressions matter. So I wanted to make sure that our docs were in a more usable form for people new to QEMU, who are maybe experimenting with using it for something new or interesting, but I didn't want to scare them away. So I want to talk about some of the fixes I've made. We have indexes now. We have an alphabetical index, and we have an index for each type of QAPI object. So now it is actually very easy to go and see a list of commands, a list of events, and so on. We have cross-references, so there's no more see also. You can just actually click and jump straight to the command or event that's being talked about in the docs. We have cross-references for the types of each field of a struct, a command, event, etc. Everything is automatically converted, so if you are curious about the format of a deeply nested structure, the breadcrumbs are there for you so that you can jump through and not waste your time searching around the page. The cross-references work across all of our docs, not just the QMP reference manual. It works anywhere within the tree, so if you have docs that extensively refer to QMP commands or events, you can add cross-references there. And if there is any chance of bit rot, the cross-reference is going to Yelp if it breaks in the future. So this is a good way to cross-link your long-form prose docs to the QMP manual and vice versa to make sure that things are well interlinked and not rotting. We have gotten rid of the members of phrase in the docs, and now they are directly inlined. So any shared structures, anything that's referenced is pulled directly into the documentation. So each object has its own full reference here. Unions are also supported here. So when you have tagged unions and branches, there are sections that actually drop down so that you can see specifically the fields for each branch to keep things all on one page for you, except for block dev add, which is still like 18 pages long, but there's limits to my power. Internal type names now, they're leaked a little less often because we're directly inlining these arguments. We're not saying, oh, it's the members of such and such, which is a fake type name. So there are actually a good number of types that have been removed from the docs because they're no longer necessary. They've been directly pulled in. So it's not perfect. I'm still leaking internal type detail to some extent. For instance, like sync, mirror sync mode, like the name of that type may not be API, but it's an improvement. I'm not perfect. Returns information is now definitely always included. Even if you don't write a description, we're still going to generate that type info for you so that it's there and fully documented in the output. The URLs are now quite a bit more stable. There's no more auto-generated IDs. We have the name of the object or the definition straight as the anchor now. So links that you give to other people, blogs that you write off-site should be an awful lot more stable now, and you can rely on them working into the future. Marcus points out that I put the name of the module in the tag name, which is not stable, but I'll probably be getting rid of that by the time we merge. So just didn't have enough time to make the change before the talk. Biased opinion again, but I think the visual contrast between sections is now a bit better, so it's faster to scroll through at a glance and kind of get a sense for exactly what you're looking at. Things are indented a bit. There's a slightly different color in the banner so that you can see section by section what you're looking at. Words have been wrapped to a much smaller visual column so that it's easier and nicer to read, things of that nature. So I think now, with some of the changes I've made, it just makes it a slightly better reference that you could possibly learn from. I think it is easier to get like a feel for a command with just like a single screen full of information. And importantly, the docs are now leaning towards QMP and away from QAPI in terms of the factoring and the way in which we're presenting information. Instead of relaying the developer factoring as is, we're trying to show how QMP actually is, the protocol people are actually using to talk to QEMU. There's a new architecture now for the doc generator. We're generating an intermediate REST and not docutils nodes directly, which allows us a much better reuse of the Sphinx APIs. it was based on Sphinx's own Python domain. So I thought, hey, if it's working for them, it probably is going to work for us. And there's a lot fewer bugs in our doc building because of that. As a result as well, you can now use any REST markup, except section headers, which I guess I could enable if you really wanted, but I think it's fine without. But pretty much any REST you want now does work. But if you hate REST syntax, I can't help. I'm very, very sorry. And best, the errors are now actually line accurate. So even though I've added a new intermediate generation step, you still get pointers to the original file and not the intermediate REST. And the line locations are improved as a result. So it's just better across the board. And how much time do I got? 5 minutes? Less than 5? 7 minutes, incredible. So this is all enabled by a new QAPI domain plugin. It works like Sphinx's autodoc. If you've ever used Sphinx autodoc, which automatically generates a bunch of Python domain directives to document source code, I've modeled our QAPI domain directly off of that. So instead of autodoc, we have QAPI-doc. And instead of the Python domain, we have the QAPI domain. So we have in our REST source document, we have the QAPI-doc directive, which invokes the QAPI-doc generator, which invokes the QAPI parser, which builds the schema. And ultimately, it generates this intermediate REST markup that contains all these new QAPI domain directives. And then Sphinx performs the final parse using the QAPI domain plugin to parse those directives. I was going to cover the QAPI domain syntax, but there's no time. So it is in the slides on pre-talks if you want to see exactly the new intermediate format, but I'm skipping it. I want to point out that when this goes live, if you're having problems, debug equals 1 is going to write that intermediate REST straight to disk. So this is what you would get. You get a nice 2-column output showing all of the source lines and the generated REST in the other column. So if you're having weird REST errors that you can't quite figure out because the context doesn't make sense, all you have to do is use debug equals 1, and you can look exactly at what it generates, which has helped me immensely in the development of this. So I'm hoping it is useful for you. We have new cross-references, so there's ways to get at specific things using this kind of elaborate syntax. But over here, there's shorthands. You can use the last form, the any reference will generate a cross-reference to any QAPI entity now. I have changed the note section to the note directive. So that's one thing I've gotten rid of in our source tree. There's no more note section. We have just the directive for it, and it generates like that. Examples is now QMP example. This one's a little more custom. This one supports mixing prose and code together so that you can give longer, better examples. And that just looks like this. It just applies some QMP lexing and validation, gives you a nice little title box. It's a little better than our old example section. The other big change is that in the QAPI source, text is split into kind of an intro and a detail section now. Before, it was just untagged sections in general, and we called the first one of those the body. Now we have an intro and a detail section where the intro is not pulled into other entries, but details are. Because the intro is often things like, oh, this is a type that helps you achieve happiness, and that doesn't need to be pulled into every other definition that uses it. Whereas details often has things like examples, notes, warnings, things that you probably do want to see in anything using it. So that kind of looks like this. There's no real source change here, but there is a semantic change where you have to consider the difference between things you want dropped if this is a structure that's inlined, versus things that you want to include. So there's like a small mental change here. But there is a problem where, yeah, if you don't have anything that separates them, the parser can't figure out exactly what you meant if it doesn't know. So I'm still working on this. We might add a details tag or some other trickery to figure it out. For now, we're using to do as a gross hack, but we're working on it. And I will go super quick here because we're running out of time. Yeah. We still have sin sections in the code. We want to get rid of them. I worked on a parser that parsed all of the historical QAPI schema that we have to try to auto-generate this, but it's complicated, so that's in progress. That's not going to be for V1 of this patch set. A problem with the sins tags as well is the difference between QAPI and QMP. Sometimes we've written these sins tags to mean, oh, this is new for this structure since version such and such, or oh, this is new in the resultant user view in QMP since version such and such. So as we're recombining and shifting context of how docs are displayed, we need to check that this since information is actually correct. I think it is in most cases, but I do need to audit it. I don't know for sure. And then there's some brief issues where I've tried my best to see like what would look best, but I do want people's feedback on like visual aesthetics and layouts and things. So if you want to check out the docs on your laptop later and kind of look over some of the decisions I've made and see if you just have any, I'm inviting bike shedding very intentionally. I would like to see it because I want people to be happy with this. Things like ifconnd, I wasn't quite sure what to do with, if we want those to link anywhere or do anything special. I've kind of stuck them in 2 places at once because I was that non-committal. So if you have strong feelings about how this information should be displayed, please let me know. Sphinx version compatibility as well is a bit of a problem still. We're requiring 343 at a minimum. I have it working. The code to do it is very gross still. So, if there's a way to avoid going all the way back, I would love to hear about that. Okay. And then there's a couple of other smaller issues that I'm still looking at and don't have time to go into the detail. So I'm going to skip to here. So the source format didn't change a lot, but there's a few details that have changed. I want developers to start looking at using the cross-references both in and outside of the QAPI portion of the docs. I want people to remember that debug equals 1 will generate the intermediate rested disk. And I'm hoping to get your feedback on some of the slides I had to kind of cram through at the end. So there we have it. Nobody wants to yell at me? Why not? Yeah.
I just want to say something you didn't, namely what a massive improvement this is, number 1. And number 2, how I couldn't have done this. Because if you touch anything, you get like 5 screenfuls of backtrace from Sphinx. And I go, okay, no, not going to do that. You're different.
Yep. I'm filled with bad ideas all of the time. So just in case, if anybody wants the slides or wants to see the HTML or any of the tools I've developed for this, they are linked on Pretalks, and we're good.